Today's story follows a mysterious young woman whose innocent appearance hides a dark and dangerous obsession. The tale opens with Cairo, a beautiful and intelligent girl living alone in a secluded old house while her parents reside in another country. Her only real companion is her love for writing. Each day she walks through dense, eerie woods to get to school, an experience that feeds her wild imagination. One day in class, she meets Jonathan, a middle-aged literature teacher. Jonathan had once dreamed of being a successful author, but after his books failed to sell, he gave up and turned to teaching. On her first day in his class, Jonathan assigned Cairo a list of books to read. To his surprise, she had already read them all. This piqued his curiosity. That same day, another student named Winnie arrived, Cairo's best friend and classmate. After class ended, Cairo and Winnie went out to lunch. Meanwhile, Jonathan happened to glance through Cairo's stack of books and was shocked to find an adult novel among them. Just then, his friend Boris walked in to grab a coffee. Jokingly, Boris picked up the book from Jonathan's hand and was stunned to see that it was one of Jonathan's own published works, a novel he had long given up on. That evening, Jonathan returned home and shared the incident with his wife, Beatrix. However, she was too busy with work and barely responded. Soon her phone rang. It was her friend, Amy, and Beatrix became entirely absorbed in the call. Jonathan sat silently, feeling neglected. Later that night, as the couple shared a drink, Jonathan tried to connect with her emotionally and physically. Just as they started to get close, her phone rang again. This time, Jonathan lost his temper. After so long, he was finally getting a moment of intimacy with his wife, but once again, it slipped away. The next day, Jonathan confided in Boris, telling him everything. Boris laughed it off, teasing him, not taking him seriously. At that moment, Cairo walked past them, and Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. Lonely and emotionally starved, he began to see her as the one who could fulfill the emotional void in his life. He smiled at her and asked playfully, "Aren't you scared of walking through the forest alone every day?" Cairo looked him straight in the eye and replied with a smirk, "The scariest thing in those woods is me." Jonathan couldn't help but laugh, but behind that laugh, a dangerous bond was beginning to form them. Back at school, Winnie intentionally drops her books in front of Boris, clearly trying to get his attention. Boris, catching on quickly, smiles and teasingly asks, "Need a hand?" Winnie flashes a playful grin and gives him a flirtatious look. From a distance, Cairo watches the scene unfold. She immediately realizes what Winnie is up to and chuckles, calling her crazy in a lighthearted way. Soon after, the two girls head back to Cairo's house together. That evening, Cairo is filling out an application form that includes a question: "What is your greatest personal achievement?" Then jokingly, Winnie says, "Wouldn't it be wild if you had an affair with your teacher? That'd definitely make for an interesting story." Cairo is stunned. To her, Jonathan is a respected teacher, and the thought feels inappropriate, but Winnie brushes it off, saying, "Come on, this stuff happens all the time now. Besides, he's experienced. Falling for him would be intense in a weird way." She even points out how Jonathan always seems to look at Cairo a little differently in class, and that seed of curiosity begins to grow. The next day at school, Cairo tries to see whether Jonathan truly pays her more attention than the others. She catches him glancing at her during class, confirming her suspicion. After class ends, Jonathan calls Cairo aside. That evening, he invites Boris over for dinner, and just before leaving, Boris playfully performs a silly dance move. Jonathan tries to mimic it, and just then, Cairo walks in. They both burst out laughing. Later, Jonathan tells Cairo how impressed he is by a paragraph she wrote, so impressed in fact that he's memorized it. Cairo is surprised and flattered to know that he has taken her writing so seriously. Jonathan then gives her an offer: "Write me a short story in the style of your favorite author, and I'll give you full credit for the assignment." Cairo agrees. She tells him she's already read his book, and just like him, she remembers several lines by heart. Jonathan is both amazed and touched. The emotional connection between them deepens, and now Jonathan finds himself developing real feelings for her. He invites Cairo to meet him privately over the weekend at a quiet spot, under the pretext of discussing her assignment. One evening, Jonathan and his wife Beatrice went out for dinner. To their surprise, the waitress at the restaurant turned out to be Winnie. She walked up to take their order, but the moment felt charged with tension. Beatrice grew suspicious. She leaned in and asked Jonathan quietly, "Isn't this the girl you were talking about?" Jonathan replied, No, that's not Cairo. It's someone else." But Beatrice wasn't convinced. She could now clearly see it. Jonathan was falling for Cairo. That weekend, Cairo arrived at the quiet venue Jonathan had asked her to meet at. Jonathan followed and joined her. A man on stage was reading poetry aloud, and while Jonathan was focused on the words, Cairo couldn't take her eyes off him. After the reading, Cairo stepped outside and lit a cigarette. A moment later, Jonathan joined her, and they shared it in silence. The intimacy was unspoken but undeniable. The next day, Cairo walked into class wearing a stunning outfit that turned heads. Even Boris couldn't help but compliment her. She ignored the praise, staying focused. Once Boris left, Jonathan and Cairo began talking. The tension between them was growing, and they were clearly becoming closer. Just then, Jonathan's phone buzzed. A message from Beatrice asking if he wanted to go out later. The next day, as soon as Jonathan exited the class, Winnie climbed up on his desk and began teasing Cairo about her growing bond with Jonathan. Meanwhile, Winnie also flirted with Boris, and in the midst of the jokes, playfully stole his phone. Cairo later realized that her own phone was missing. She suspected it had accidentally ended up in Jonathan's bag. At Jonathan's home, Beatrice was once again too busy with work. Their plans for the evening had to be canceled. Just then, Jonathan noticed he had Cairo's phone. Instead of waiting until school, he decided to return it himself. When he reached Cairo's house, it began to rain. Cairo opened the door, and for a moment, time stood still. Jonathan was stunned by her beauty. As the rain poured, they looked at each other as though the world around them had faded. In a moment filled with silence, tension, and desire, they kissed. Jonathan handed her the phone and left soon after, conflicted but visibly affected by what had happened. Later that night, while Jonathan sat beside his wife, a new email arrived. It was from Cairo. She had sent him the first draft of her story. At the same time, Beatrice turned to him and said, "I don't think I can keep working while living in this house. It's too distracting." But Jonathan wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the screen, reading every word Cairo had written, and falling deeper into something he couldn't control. Jonathan could tell that his wife Beatrice no longer wanted to live with him, so he moved into a small cabin to get some space and clear his mind. Alone, he opened the story Cairo had emailed him. It was bold, extremely bold. The story was about a romantic relationship between a student and her teacher, clearly a fictionalized version of their connection. As Jonathan read it, a storm of emotions stirred inside him. The attraction, the guilt, the temptation. But for now, he knew he had to do nothing. The next day, Cairo noticed she hadn't received a call or message from Jonathan. She grew anxious. When she finally saw him at school and asked what he thought of her story, Jonathan lied. "I didn't like it," he said coldly. "There were too many errors. It didn't work for me." Cairo was stunned. "But the story is about us," she said softly. Jonathan shook his head. "There's nothing between us. I'm your teacher. That's all." Her heart shattered. He gently told her not to write stories like that again, but Cairo couldn't hold back her fury. "That story is perfect," she snapped. "You're just afraid because I wrote something you never could." The anger consumed her. She insulted Jonathan, calling him a failed writer, just a mediocre teacher now. "I can't fail this class," she warned him before storming out in tears. Later that night, she drowned her emotions with wine alongside Winnie. Meanwhile, Jonathan was visibly tense. Beatrice noticed and asked what was wrong. He finally opened up about Cairo's story. When he read it aloud, Beatrice was stunned. She tried to comfort him. They even began to reconnect until Boris showed up unexpectedly, breaking the moment. Elsewhere, Cairo was venting to Winnie. He pretended to care, she said bitterly. But in the end, it was all fake. Wanting revenge, or at least a distraction, she asked Winnie to flirt with Boris to divert attention. Winnie began teasing Boris, even sending him a strange photo that startled him. Alarmed, he abruptly left Jonathan's house. Moments later, Beatrice received a call from the school. Rumors were flying about an alleged affair between Jonathan and Cairo. Shocked and furious, she confronted Jonathan. "Is this real? Is she really your student? Is this whole mess because of her story, or because you're actually in love with her?" Jonathan denied everything, but Beatrice wasn't convinced. The next day, Cairo didn't come to class. Instead, she was sitting in the vice principal's office. Jonathan was called in as well. During the meeting, the vice principal began questioning them. Cairo, without hesitation, told everything. "Jonathan was the one who first showed interest. We shared cigarettes. We met outside school. He even invited me out." When the vice principal turned to Jonathan, he stammered. His answers were incomplete, his nervousness obvious. The hesitation said more than words ever could. That was enough. Jonathan was dismissed from his position immediately. Outside the office, Boris pulled him aside. "You should have known better," he said. "You crossed a line." And with that, Boris walked away. Back home, Jonathan told Beatrice he'd been fired. Her suspicion now turned into certainty. Again, she asked him, "Did something actually happen between you and that girl?" Once again, Jonathan denied it. But this time, even he wasn't sure if anyone would ever believe him again. Beatrice couldn't stay silent anymore. She had finally accepted the truth. Jonathan was having an affair with Cairo. It all made sense now. Why he was fired. Why the rumors had exploded. Furious, she confronted him. Jonathan said nothing. His silence confirmed her worst fears. Their argument escalated quickly. Years of suppressed resentment came pouring out. They hurled accusations, blamed each other for old mistakes, for failures, for lost dreams. What started as a confrontation turned into an emotional war. By the end of it, Beatrice made a firm decision. She wanted a divorce. Meanwhile, when he met up with Cairo, she told her plainly, "Because of you, Jonathan lost his job." But Cairo, she didn't care. With a cold, detached smile, she replied, "He made the mistake of thinking I was weak. But now, he knows who I really am." Cairo began listing everything that had happened as her greatest accomplishments, as if all of it was part of her plan. She ended the conversation with a wicked grin. Now Jonathan has no job and no wife. Let's see if he ever writes again. The story ends here. What Jonathan did cost him everything. His reputation, his marriage, and the career he once cherished. Cairo exposed his deepest vulnerabilities, and now he was left with nothing but his guilt. No path back, no redemption in sight. This was the story of a man undone by his desires, and a girl who refused to be underestimated. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. We'll be back soon with another gripping tale. Until then, take care.